So thank you everyone for being here today. This is the first seminar we had some last year online, but it's the first seminar of the series live. So thank you, Sophie, for coming. For people online, we hope that you see the event. We're having started this series, so maybe I say a few words about the idea behind this series. So we've got a behavioral science lab here. I'm a professor of behavioral science and I work with Fanny. And at the business school, we want to be a place where we bridge the gap between academia and practice, not just in behavioral science, but everywhere. But because I'm a passionate also about I think everyone who's in behavioral science, they say, I love behavioral science. There's something like this. We want to also create this environment when we bridge academics talking about research and the latest in behavioral science and practitioners like you coming and tell us what is going on in the real world, tell the students also who might want to become practitioners as well. So that's really the idea of bridging the gap. And we didn't talk before, but your title was just perfect for the first seminar and the first talk on here. So it's my pleasure to have Zsofia Belovai coming today. I've got some notes to introduce you to the audience. So to that you, I know that you now in MoreThanNow you lead the organizational performance practice. Zsofia is focusing on projects relating to psychological safety, performance management, and reskilling, which is very interesting approach. And you worked your way up as an intern to a practice lead over the last 3 years, so quite a fast ascension. And she's already conducted 11 randomized control trials in her practice, which I think is an achievement already in this short period as well. So she's helped to improve the working lives of tens of thousands of people across companies and industries in collaboration with academics from Harvard Business School, INSEAD, UCL, and LMU Munich. And before being a part of MoreThanNow, Zsofia received a BA in psychology from Cambridge University and an MSc in behavioral science from LSE. So it's a great honor to have you. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to hear about your experience.
Yeah, thank you for the intro, and thank you for the invite. It's quite an honor to be here, and in all honesty, this is my first university gig, so I was quite excited. I always was looking forward to giving back to academia because it was a really important part of my life. I think Gal has told everything that's to know about me. I've been with MoreThanNow for 3 years now, almost 3 years, and I recently took over as the practice lead for the organizational practice within MoreThanNow, which basically means that I'm responsible for getting my projects, managing them, and just making sure that everything runs smoothly. I'm going to be honest, I'm not entirely sure how long the presentation is going to be, but I can assure you that it's got everything that is there to know about MoreThanNow and how we're bridging the gap between academia and business. So the plan of action for the next half-ish hour, I'm going to narrow down from quite a broad view about what's the motivation behind the way that we work. I wanted to talk about the disconnect between academia and how the field actually employs the insights that comes out of research labs, and then move on to MoreThanNow itself, a brief history of us, how we got to the model where we are, and finally I brought 2 case studies that I think demonstrate really well what we're all about, and pretty much just give you a holistic view of what we do, and I think it's going to be an interesting, novel thing that you hear, because not many other organizations do what we do, which is quite an exciting thing to be able to tell. So first of all, I'm sure you have all heard about a replication crisis in social sciences, which expanded to behavioral science as well. And for those who are watching and are not really familiar with this, basically the replication crisis just describes the fact that a lot of the original research findings from the mid 20th century are not replicating nowadays, and it's putting a bit of a strain on the entire discipline because we don't really know what actually we can employ in real life and whatnot. And there's lots of reasons for this, which I'm not going to go into now. But as you can see on some of the headlines that I found, there's been a bit of an upheaval in our specific discipline as well recently. And I think those of us who are in the room have heard about the no evidence for nudging paper up there, which got fairly misinterpreted too. And there's been some issues with data falsification recently as well. So let's just be honest, academia has not been doing that well lately. But on the other hand, so since we're a behavioral science consultancy, first of sorts, I can't neglect the fact that management consultancy itself is not exactly an evidence-based field either. And there's actually some evidence saying that public sector consulting predicts inefficiency in terms of functioning. And there's a lot of money being spent on creating slides and sort of solutions that are not eventually evaluated. And funnily enough, at MoreThanNow, we combine these two, and but stay with me, it's not as bad as it sounds. We're actually, I think, doing something quite radical and good in terms of uniting the positives of both of these spheres of working, academia and business, specifically management consulting. And I want to go back to the previous slide to explain why, because there's the paper on heterogeneity, which I think is what is really missing from management consulting, or not management consulting, academia, but is employed in consulting. So a consultancy will create a bespoke solution for any organization that they work with. However, academia tries to generalize broadly some of the findings that they put out, and no one really reads the limitation sections when it comes to practitioners, and that's why there's quite a bit of issues when people will just take what they found in papers and try to implement them, and they don't know what's happening. However, at MoreThanNow, we took this heterogeneity, the RCT model, and the management consulting experience to create something truly unique and employ RCTs to actually test bespoke interventions in companies themselves. And again, for those who don't really know what heterogeneity is, it basically just means that some sort of intervention has a differential effect on different subgroups of a big group. For example, for women and men, something might work fairly differently. But to take it back into the organizational view, we do think that some of the interventions that have been done in previous RCTs in academia do work, but they have to be tweaked in a way that it works in the specific organization because, as we all know, context matters quite a bit. But let's go back to the beginning of where MoreThanNow started and how we actually got to the point where we pretty much basically only do randomized controlled trials with some extra added spice in some of our projects. MoreThanNow was founded in 2016 by my manager, James Alfer, and the first couple of years were sort of to find the way of where we were going. James also did the behavioral science MSc at LSE, so he learned on the way. And we got to the point of running RCTs by 2019. So the first couple of RCTs were run before I joined in early 2020, which was also the year when the pandemic hit. So after the first couple of months of excitement, we really had to just make up something to do because everything shut down and we were really in the trenches with it, just like everyone else. But I truly believe that if it didn't happen, we would have gone on the way up, just like we were before, and we have been ever since as well. As the recovery started, we started scaling RCTs, and we wanted to do more because our partners were really enjoying it, and we've got several years-long relationships with some of the organizations that we work with. And 2022 was truly revolutionary because we established the MoreThanNow Labs, where we actually started working together quite closely with academics across behavioral sciences, management sciences, and economics as well, economics too. But before I go into that, I have to mention some of our wonderful partners without whom this couldn't happen, because we need those practitioners who might come out of Kingston Business School, who will go out into the field and be able to identify those conditions that allow us to run RCTs and test cultural interventions in a way that we can actually say it had an impact. And we work across industries from telecoms, pharma, FMCG, pensions, financial services. But what ties all of these companies together, apart from the motivation to actually work with the behavioral science and sort of the scientific methodology, is that they have quite a big employee base, because it's a big limitation for us, but you can only really show the impact of a cultural intervention if you have enough people to do it with. We've got access to anonymized, high quality data, so that we can actually show in the numbers as well if anything is happening, and usually a very motivated delivery team, as I just said, who are hopefully going to be the practitioners of the future. And we have our academic partners coming into this equation, which really makes what we work incredibly special. We had worked with a couple of academics before 2022, but this year we really extended it, because what we realized is that if we have someone working with us who might want to publish the actual experiment that we do, that will keep us accountable to push for the kinds of conditions that I mentioned, a large enough sample size, a good enough data, and a good delivery team who will do exactly what we tell them to do. And it's also kind of an accountability for the organizations that we work with as well, because they will be more likely to provide these conditions, given the condition that they might have the sort of gravitas of someone publishing from their company, and them being able to put their names next to some incredible people, as you can see up here across our labs, from Amy Edmondson, who you've probably heard of from psychological safety. Iris Bonnet, for example, it's still quite an incredible thing that we worked with her in the DNI lab. But each and every one of these academics have a background that we really do trust, and they trust us. So it's been a very fruitful relationship so far to be able to work with them and push for research and implementation of research that I think that has never really happened before in the past. But that's pretty much the gist of how MoreThanNow works at the moment. There's 5 of us, so it's quite a small team, but we get a lot done with what we already have, and we're all quite passionate about what we are trying to implement. So it really is something that I hope will be able to be scaled in the future. And there are a couple of other organizations who do something similar, like the Behavioural Insights team. But there's more for it, and I can only highly encourage anyone to try to work more with this kind of methodology. But in the third part of my presentation, I will go into the exciting part, the case studies, because I think that this is the best way to really demonstrate what we are eventually doing and how we're uniting business and academia in our projects. So in this study, which we conducted earlier this year, and it's still one of my favorites to this day, because I think this was one of the first ones coming out of not only just the labs, but the motivation to really run robust, big studies that we can eventually publish later. So for this organization, the business case was an organization-wide issue with the ability to speak up, and this was showed across several data sources. How we find these out is we conduct sort of discovery phases within which we collect data from across the organization, put them into one big spreadsheet with anonymized IDs, and run a couple of tests in sort of an exploratory data analysis and create a few research questions. And back to where I was, Speak Up came out as particularly low across the organization for a few years. There was also a need for a fairly minimally intrusive intervention, because you can't just always change something big, and that's a big part of our work as well. And there were some existing resources related to psychological safety, but it was just a really big website with lots of sub-websites, and no one actually looked at it, most likely, at least not that we know of. But there was a big academic background already for how psychological safety can be applied in organizations. However, on the other hand, not a lot of RCTs had been done, which we were quite baffled about. And we're really excited to run one of the first ones in this discipline. And we had a little literature search, just like before any sort of experiment that we do, on what we could be doing. And we found a positive impact of removing blockers from priority goals and focusing on individual needs when it comes to one-to-one meetings, which was our focus of the intervention. And before I move into the structure itself, we also had an access to a wonderful sample of 900 teams, which was perfect to test 3 a control group and 2 treatment groups, which led us to sort of the following design. And I know that people who are probably watching won't be able to read all of this because I copied this from the actual output of the project, because it took me a while to put this together. So I'm going to reuse it as much as I can. But to really quickly explain it, we created 2 PDFs, one based on the removing blockers motivation and the other one based on the individuation. This meant that we send these PDFs to randomly selected managers across the business. And we didn't really send anything to the control group, because that's why I have a control group, to compare against something. So across sort of 10-ish weeks, we sent a few emails to them. First of all, we collected the pre-experiment data, as you would. Sent a kickoff email to everyone. This also went out to the control group, because we have to ensure that we meet data privacy and ethical standards as well. This is especially important for publishing. And then throughout the following couple of weeks, we sent out the PDFs to the relevant managers repeatedly, sort of kind of as a reminder. And some of these emails came from the leadership team, because we find that it makes a big difference in terms of employees and managers actually reading their emails if it doesn't come from a mailbox, but from someone who's actually important. And at the end, we did exactly the same as at the beginning. The pulse survey was collected. And I should mention that we placed this intervention between 2 of the regular pulse surveys of this company. Again, not to intrude too much. We didn't want to pressure people with more surveys, because in large organizations, you already have to fill out a lot of them, and people will be less likely to do it unless it's something that is regular and something that they are familiar with. And the results were quite fascinating. So just to remind you, what we asked managers is to conduct their one-to-one meetings in a slightly different way throughout these couple of weeks. And what we found is that if managers focus on the individual needs of employees in their one-to-ones, there was a significant difference compared to the control group in terms of reported psychological safety in this pulse survey. And more excitingly, we found the heterogeneity effect that I talked about, that the teams who already scored high on psychological safety reacted much better to the removing blockers intervention, which meant that these teams most likely were already pretty good in terms of assessing, of talking about their individual needs. But what they needed is just some more focus on how they can prioritize their tasks. And that took them even further in terms of psychological safety. So it was quite exciting, and there's a lot more to the results, but we have a finite amount of time, so I won't be going into that. But there is a working paper out at the moment, which I'm incredibly proud about, published by our collaborators. I think it is open access, so you can definitely all read it and go into the details. But just to add to the results, this was all sort of validated with Microsoft Viva Insights data too, which means that we saw in Microsoft data that people were scheduling more frequent one-to-ones throughout the couple of weeks that we ran the intervention. And we've been working with the behavioral validation with Microsoft Viva data recently quite a lot. And it's a really exciting novel way to put in an objective measure of what people are eventually doing. But there are 3 big takeaways from this. And connecting it to the motivation of my presentation. first of all, we created something very unique here. And there wasn't a need to create a very intrusive intervention. There's no need for a big transformation. All we wanted to do is change one moment that already existed, because time pressure is always an issue. We have a running joke at MoreThanNow that organizations don't have time to resolve the issue that they don't have time. So we try to facilitate that as much as we can by working with existing structures, and I can only highly recommend that if you ever design interventions. And finally, yes, pay attention to heterogeneous effects, because now we know that we can send out guides to teams based on their pulse survey results, or that's what we recommend it to the business at least. And if they take it away, then we are quite sure that it is going to be the best way ahead, at least until we hit some kind of plateau. But again, that's nuance and detail of science. But we say to always evaluate and retest and design new interventions depending on how numbers are varying. And that's pretty much the end of the psych safety study. But I have another case study for you, which is also is similar, but interesting for different ways. We worked with Nationwide Building Society on this. This was, for context, this was in the middle of COVID. Everyone was working from home, and as I even listed in the academic background, Microsoft ran a huge, I think 1 million observation data analysis showing that there was an increased working pressure on people while they work from home, which is quite funny in the context that now companies are worried that people who work from home are not working, because people had a lot more out of hours work. They were doing more meetings, and they just spent a lot more time in terms of in front of their computers making up. So they didn't really make up for the time that they're commuted in terms of doing something else. They worked, which is obviously not great in terms of well-being. At least the data doesn't say it is. There was also external evidence on the declining mental health, which we connected to the Microsoft research. And in this company, we had an access to 100 teams, which was approximately 1,000 people, and which allowed us to test 2 arms for an intervention. The business case was very similar to the previous study. There was survey evidence for employees expressing a need for their managers' availability in terms of being able to talk to them, to ask questions for them, because time pressure was really big and managers were constantly in meetings, because there's always a higher likelihood to put leadership into more meetings, and they don't actually have time to deal with the people management part of their work. There was, yes, a general issue with meeting overload and issues with work-life balance in this company too. And they just really wanted to create a novel methodology on how to prioritize and how to resolve this, but they didn't really know how to go about it until we were running a slightly different and similar project. And then we talked about this iteration with a different side of the business than what the other one was running. So that again speaks to replicability, but with slight tweaks to the given business case. So we designed the reset sessions, which is not a complicated intervention, to be fair. We worked with Dr. Laura Georgia from LSE, who's also our research lead at MoreThanNow on this, and her research focuses time management and well-being. So it was quite a seamless way to do that, because she's quite familiar with literature. But what the research session meant is that we asked managers to go and sit down with their teams and just talk about how they feel about time pressure and prioritization, what they need to be able to better do their work. And based on this, they were asked to schedule focus times, 2 hours for 4 days per week for a couple of weeks, which I think was a little bit too much, which was a takeaway from this project, that 4 days might be too much, but eventually managers could do whatever they wanted to. And that's always an important part of the work that we do, that we always leave a little bit of autonomy in how they implement what we ask them to do. Because at the end of the day, the things that you ask managers to do is going to work because they know how to adapt it to their own individual teams. Again, heterogeneity. And also to keep them accountable, we asked them to do weekly check-ins, either at the beginning or the end of the week so that they can keep each other in check. This is the experiment tree of what exactly happened. The treatment group received the reset. We held a workshop to explain what we were asking for them, and we sent out a brief as well. And the control group just went about their life business as usual. Our outcome measure was survey data. This was based on validated metrics. At that time, we weren't really doing the pulse survey methodology just yet, and they weren't even really asking about it anyway. So we created it just based on what already existed out in the literature. And we also used Microsoft Viva data here to validate it because it was COVID, everyone was working from home, it made a lot of sense. And the results were quite astonishing, to be honest. In the survey, the people who were in the treatment group were massively more likely to perceive their working lives to be a lot more productive. They achieved their goals, and they just felt like they were progressing a lot better compared to the control group. And this was visible in the Microsoft Viva data as well, that people just spend a little less time working. So basically they had more days without out-of-hours work, and they spent way less time on emails as well. And yeah, as I said, this was the first study where we worked with Microsoft Viva data, and since then it's been wherever this is available, it's been an integral part of how we work, just to make sure that we can connect actual behaviors to what people say, because the two kind of they complement each other in a way. And the takeaway from this was that manager interventions work quite well. Again, this was probably one of the first ones where we did this, and we've been replicating that model elsewhere too, with its own contextual specifics. And again, given that the initiative was voluntary and we sort of asked managers to adapt it to their own ways, we think it worked quite a lot better rather than just prescribing something. And as you can see here on the right, it was replicated by another company without sort of our involvement, which spoke quite highly of people eventually taking away what we actually put out on our website, and it was really, really exciting. So we were excited to hear that, and I believe there's an interview on the website with the team in case you're interested in hearing and reading more about what they did. But once again, and I will be repeating, heterogeneity works because they adapted it to their own context and they found a result. So, yeah, that's sort of the end of this case study. But I wanted to take some time to tie all of this up that I've been talking about. So the 4 bullet points pretty much describe how these studies and all of the studies that we run, we think work the best. So first of all, we think small. This means that we find those existing structures and moments in the working days that can be slightly tweaked, such as maybe putting some more time in your calendar when you will be working, or the one-to-ones that managers are already conducting, or team meetings, for example. And there are loads of more ideas that you can probably think up. Second, we already tried to solve things with adding rather than subtracting from existing processes, which just leads to overload as well as time overload. So we like to change existing structures, just as I said, in thinking small, and we try to recommend taking away from existing structures as well to make them a little bit simpler, because simplification does work sometimes, not just sometimes, a lot of the times. Third, context matters. While we work with sort of experiment models now, we keep repeating what we have been doing in the past. We always tweak it to the given context. We speak a lot to our partners and ask them to put into when we design the intervention, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who know their employee basis, and they will be the ones who can help us design the communication in a way that will eventually, well, emails will be open, emails will be read, and instructions will eventually be followed. And yeah, that I pretty much just explained the 4th bullet point on that side as well, that we always involve academics and the stakeholders as well in the conversation, because that middle bit is what we think is really missing from making sure that practice is effective based on what has been put out into academia, but also giving back from academia to something that we can actually test and show our partners that, yes, this worked, here are the numbers, it might get published. This is not just slapping a solution on something and just thinking that it might have worked and have paid for a lot of money. And to put it into numbers, we're not stopping. As of today, we are running 12 experiments with almost 200,000 employees in collaboration with 16 academics. And these 12 experiments are beyond the 11 that Gal mentioned at the beginning that I have run. So I think we're really just getting started, and there's a lot more coming out of the MoreThanNow Labs. And that should also signify the end of my presentation. So thank you very much for your attention in the room and at home or in the offices as well.
Thank you. The audio. We have this microphone, which is a very funny microphone, and so let me. We at first we thought we would open the question only for the room, and but also I don't know. I think if we want to have the questions for the outside audience, because I could see that there are quite a few people also in the room, we can leave. And the only thing I will ask you is to take that little fluffy microphone when you ask your question, so that the people who join us from beyond the live stream can hear about. And so if you want to have a question for Sophie, you want to ask, raise your hand. Yes. This could be our mascot.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sophie. So one question which I had is you mentioned about Microsoft Viva data. So what does it tell you actually? I mean, I come from tech background and I don't have much idea about all this. So I would love to know what insights would you get from Microsoft Viva data?
That's a great question. Have you used Teams and Outlook before? I'm sure you have.
Yes.
So basically, it collects data about everything that you do, the number of emails that you send, the conversations that you have, the time you spend online, and all of that can be put out into a spreadsheet, a huge spreadsheet eventually, that will tell us in an anonymous way. So it's never based on names on what you're actually doing. And we ask for that from organizations, and it can be linked up to the individuals, and then we can connect it to their survey responses as well.
That's really good. I didn't know about this whole thing even existed. So organizations would have access to this particular data, you're saying?
If they pay for it, yes.
If they pay for it, and if they share that particular data with you, you would be able to analyze it and provide insights.
Yeah, we usually, so we like to link up three main types of data: demographic data, survey data, and Microsoft Viva data, to give you back the most basic insights. And then we would ideally expand those data sets with performance management numbers as well, sick leave data, for example, and then you can run so many types of data analyses. I think someone who's a data scientist could really spend a lot of time in a data set like that. But it pretty much just gives you an insight into how actual behavior is connected to what people are saying and how they're feeling.
Oh, that's really interesting. I mean, whichever organization that I join next, if I see some problem, I will come to MoreThanNow. Yeah. For
Yes, please.
intervention. Yeah. Any other questions?
Thank you. Thank you, Zsofia, very much. Very, very interesting presentation, very relevant for me because I do deliver interventions at work, and in the evenings I'm a PhD student, so I'm researching flexible working arrangements and how people work and utilize them. So one question I have, are those RCTs available somewhere in one place where we can access them?
So any case study that we had the availability, that we could publish, because a lot of it depends on comms teams, should be on our website under the Insight section. And in terms of academic output, we only have that one paper out just yet, but our website is probably the best place to find them.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. I guess this is a general question when you're thinking about bridging academia with business. Do you find pressures to have to compromise on some of the academic rigor that you might wish to have from a kind of a purely sort of academic sense with the business sort of practicalities?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's where we come in the picture, because we can communicate both with academia and with business and try to find the like sort of middle ground that works for everyone. But definitely, and sometimes academics come up with the wildest ideas that they want to test, and then we just have to be like, okay, chill out, maybe not. And then there's businesses sometimes pushing back on very important parts of what we would like to deliver, but we're pretty good at sitting down with them and having that conversation. Obviously, sometimes you have to compromise, but I think if you understand both aspects, that then you can navigate it in a way that you'll have the best outcome.
Thanks.
I have one more question. So you said heterogeneity always works. So can you explain what that is?
I wouldn't say it works. I think you should think about heterogeneity in a way that everyone is different, and in every different context, something else will work. So you have to sort of explore what's going on within a certain company or a certain business area within a company that you really need to make sure you adjust an intervention to. For example, the one-to-one study is something that we've spoken about with other partners as well, and they want to replicate it, but we wouldn't run the exact same experiment because the same two interventions might not be the best approach there. So we will look at their data, speak to their stakeholders, and come up with a theoretical background that we think will work in that given context.
Okay, yeah, got it.
And always do your subgroup analyses as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's fascinating. Also because your concept is something that was really missing. You gave me a different understanding of the bridging, because you are the bridge actually, and that's the bridge that was missing. And so I think that's quite interesting. Of academics, sometimes the struggle is to find which business, that we can have the contact to, and then you're the matchmaker in a way with the. So I've got one question. You mentioned in the beginning that you did a survey to find out what could be the issue for the organization. Can you tell us a little bit about this? That was not the pre-pulse survey, was it?
No. So I mentioned that we do discovery projects, discovery phases. And what this means is that we go out into the business and try to collect the regular surveys that they collect, line them up by IDs, also demographics, performance metrics, Microsoft data if this is available, progression data, sick leaves, promotions, whatever you can think of, and construct a huge data set. And within that, depending on who we speak to, we will look at different areas and how, if there are any sort of, for example, people are reporting low psychological safety in one of the surveys. Then if we have Microsoft data, then we might look at how long they work, how many meetings do they have, do they even have one-to-ones with their managers, and sort of just go out into the wild and try to gauge it. It's obviously not the most efficient way to go about it, but if you speak to people, they will most likely be able to tell you where the problem is, and then we validate it with the surveys.
And your data, do you get it from HR? How do you, so I imagine data often, I think of organizations I know, and they wouldn't say, oh, here's all my data, you go it. So how do you build that relationship so you can actually have access to all these data in these?
I think it's a slow process. So I think Ericsson was up on the screen. We've been working with them for 3 years, and we got to the point in the relationship now that we have access to most of their HR data. But it takes a time. It's slow. We sort of try to start with really small proof of concept experiments to start building that kind of trust. We don't always ask for all the data. It's pretty much a gradual process. And we can come to like the end of a project or a couple of projects where we have a big data set. But we did quite a big work this year with one of the organizations where eventually our task was to actually this was 2 organizations, we've done it twice, that they asked us to construct these data sets because it's also an issue there that data lies everywhere and no one is really able to connect it. But we've sort of developed our own capability throughout the years, and I couldn't even explain how we do it, that we're able to speak to the data teams and the HR individuals that they will give us that data in a way. But we have case studies that help us develop that kind of trust.
See what they could get from it.
And we're really careful about data privacy too, so we don't ever hold any individually identifiable data. Oftentimes we work with team level data, which is not the best, and we just make sure that there's no way that it will slip out of our hands.
Very good, thank you. Any
One
more
follow-up question on what Gil was asking. So let's say I'm someone who reported I'm experiencing low psychological safety, and let's say Chris has reported he's good. So now would you see the number of sick leaves that I have taken and the number of emails that I have sent, or the long working hours? Would you be able to get to my data?
So if a company gives me that, yes, but depending because we always ask for anonymized data, so I wouldn't know it's you.
Okay.
And I don't care what one person does, to be honest. And I think that's what companies sometimes don't really understand, that I'm not going to go into the data and find a specific person and like search them on LinkedIn and be like, they have low psychological safety. We care about patterns. We're scientists, we are statisticians, we are econometricians, and I'm not going to be able to withdraw any type of insight if I just pinpoint 1 out of 15,000 employees. So that's nothing that's.
So it's really the patterns that you look.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Oops. Any other questions? No? I think we can close the live streaming. I'm gonna ask again. Thank you for Zsofia and all your insights. Very grateful that you came. This is a great event. I don't know exactly how many people were there. I just saw a message popping out. Says, so nice to finish my day and listening to Sophie talking about MoreThanNow. So we'll definitely do it again. We have the next seminar in about a month. So the idea is that we grow this community in person as well. You were saying how nice it is to be able to do this connection and the room is big. So, feel free to come back again. But whenever it's possible, we will also have that streaming. So, but thank you for coming today. And I'll shut the microphone, and here we can have coffee and biscuits. Thank you.